Bet the Board in conjunction with NASCAR presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Furman and racing analyst Chris Wormy.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, a Bet the Board production in conjunction with NASCAR. One playoff race down, 9 to go, and oh my, did Darlington offer us a little bit of drama last Sunday. I'm your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and racing analyst, Chris Wormy. And Worm, I'm not even sure how to wrap my head around what we saw in Darlington, because as ridiculous as the finish was at Daytona the week before with some backmarker cars finishing in the top 10, I think Darlington basically said, hey, Daytona, hold my beer.
I mean, I went back and looked at my message or my tweets during the race, and I had back-to-back, what is going on? And then I followed it up with, wait, what the hell is going on? And so I was kind of speechless with everything that happened. I mean, we'll get into it more, but I'm just happy for Erik Jones. I'll start by saying that. I'm happy for Erik Jones.
Yeah, and I think it's a great place for the 43 who grabs the checkered flag. For those folks that are new to the Stay Green podcast, we divide things up around here into 3 parts. Stage 1, a recap of what we saw last. Of course, we'll try and go through some of the carnage, or whatever you want to call it, that we saw transpire at Darlington. Stage 2, a little bit more gambling-driven focus about some of the techniques and the processes that we use to make ourselves profitable at the track each weekend. And last but certainly not least, a full-scale breakdown of Kansas Part 2 that we'll see unfold this weekend. Do want to remind all of you to follow Chris on Twitter. That's at ChrisWormy15. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board. And I think you led us into a perfect segue talking about Erik Jones, his second win of the Southern 500. It marks the 200th career victory for the 43 car. Erik Jones, widely available at ridiculous long shot prices, so a hat tip to those folks who had the foresight to use him in some part of their gambling portfolio and equation. The last time the 43 actually made it to victory lane, Worm, was the Daytona Summer Race, or Firecracker 400, whatever we were calling it back then, in 2014, a car driven by Aric Almirola. And Erik Jones did make a bit of history. He became the first non-playoff driver to win the first postseason event since NASCAR introduced the elimination format back in 2014. You said it. Congratulations to the 43. Probably got a little bit of a raw deal during his time at Joe Gibbs, but I have to imagine this was a weight lifted off his shoulders, and he delivered. It's arguably one of his best tracks.
Oh, for sure. I mean, he's won there twice now. I mean, this is how many guys have 2 Southern 500 wins that, I mean, he probably has less than a handful of wins in his career. 2 of them are the Southern 500. I mean, you can hang your hat on that career. I know that he won't be happy with that if, that's kind of where it ends. But, he's just good at high tire wear tracks. I mean, he's great at Fontana, and he was going to be great here. I expect maybe he'll be good at Homestead as well. Obviously, a lot had to go right for him to find himself in victory lane, but he did it. And you know what? He's one of those guys that, he might not be, let's just say, running in the top 5 every week, but when he gets a chance with a good car underneath him, he's as good as anyone in the Cup Series, in my opinion.
We say it all the time in NASCAR at the highest level. Obviously, the single biggest factor for any of these drivers to win, it'll sound dumb, it'll sound rudimentary, it's just keeping your car on the track. If things break the right way, if cautions fall at the right time, you don't have to have the best car for all 500 miles in a case like Darlington or any of these races going forward. You need to be good on pit road. You have to have a car that withstands its wear and tear and everything else that'll factor into it. So a hat tip to Erik Jones, spoiling the party for the 16 playoff drivers who saw the standings thrust into a bit of upheaval, mainly because we saw a lot of the favorites coming in struggle mightily, and we may as well start with the man who appeared to have a pretty healthy cushion going into Darlington, a 36th place finish later, and suddenly Chase Elliott finds himself in 9th place. Chase did come in as the leader, spins on lap 113, and the reality of it was 10 minutes wasn't enough for his team to get the 9 car back out on the track. We've talked about Chase Elliott. He gets better as the races go on. He probably didn't have a race-winning car, but I don't think they anticipated a calamitous finish like we saw from him in this race.
Certainly not. I mean, I didn't. We're sitting here holding a matchup ticket on this kid, just kind of hoping Chase Elliott just does Chase Elliott. And,
which would have worked and allowed us to cash our ticket, because Austin Cindric did what Austin Cindric did, ran at the tail end of the lead lap.
Yeah, I mean, what are you going to do? He had a great car. I think he passed him in like the first, they qualified obviously opposite ends of the field. But, if you want to look at Chase, he's only 14 points to the good, which is just crazy to think after the year he's had. Now, I don't expect him to struggle or even change the plan. Nothing should change from last week to this week other than, like, if you do make a mistake, we could have a situation heading into Bristol, but I think they're also comfortable with that. Bristol's a good track for him. Just kind of one of those things where reality sets in and it's like, hey, we still have to go out there and run races in the playoffs. So you can't take it for granted.
No, and I think on some level, this is exactly why NASCAR devised this format. Regardless of how dominant you are during the regular season, you can build yourself a little bit of a cushion, but at the same time, one bad race, and you're right back mired in traffic, so to speak, trying to secure passage to the next round. Obviously, you have a little bit more wiggle room when only 4 drivers of the 16 are eliminated after the first 3 races, but at the same time, suddenly we've got a little bit of drama building, and probably too much drama for the 4 car, who drops to the 16th seed in the playoff standings, 13 points below the cut line, and it was Kevin Harvick with the spiciest comment of the entire race. They haven't fixed anything. We just let it keep going and keep going, Harvick said after exiting the race. The car started burning, and as it burned, the flames started coming through the dash. I ran a couple laps, and then as the flame got bigger, it started burning stuff up, and I think right there you see all the brake fluid that was probably coming out the brakes and part of the brake line, but the fire was coming through the dash. What a disaster for no reason, and unfortunately, Worm, it wasn't Kevin Harvick talking about our best bet head-to-head matchup against Ryan Blaney. It was more his car that caught on fire.
Well, yeah, and the comments he made about how the parts come from NASCAR. And this is something, like I said, I've never been one to claim that they know the ins and outs or the inner workings of how these Cup cars, work on a week-to-week basis. But he made it quite clear that this is a problem that, it was a little bit on NASCAR. And, that's what happens when you throw a microphone in a guy's face right after he gets out of a burning car in the first race of the playoffs, where he knows he's going to be digging himself out of a hole. So, you know what? But NASCAR took action. They made some changes throughout the week. And like I said, I'm not going to claim to know what they are, but I'm imagining that they're going to try to fix the problem, because here's the deal. No one wants fires in race cars. So that's they wear a fire suit.
Spoiler alert, nobody wants fires in race cars.
Yeah, that's like not even a new rule. That's like always been a rule. So NASCAR, whenever there's issues like this that get brought up in the media, and it's not like it's a new driver. Harvick knows his way around this circuit, and if he's seeing issues like this, I imagine that it's not just a jaded driver, or there's probably some truth to it. So I was happy to see NASCAR take some measures to make safety changes.
I think on some level, it's good that you get the elder statesman to speak up. Kevin Harvick's 46 years old. He knows he's in the twilight of his career. Denny Hamlin, north of 40 as well. These guys have been outspoken, whether it's safety measures, whether it's the efficiency of the parts, or other things that they find problematic in the week in, week out racing. I think it's important for NASCAR to hear that. I think it forces everybody to make some of those adjustments on the fly. And to your point, I read the article on NASCAR.com. Don't know how to pronounce a lot of the terms, any of the things that they talked about in that article. I just know that NASCAR is going to try and make changes going forward, and we'll see some of that begin with Kansas. But Kevin Harvick wasn't the first member of the Ford camp to catch on fire. I mean, we've seen it from the 22. We saw it from the 14. We saw it from the 17, who still found his way to get back on the lead lap at Indianapolis. So it's not the first time, and a lot of speculation that maybe it's the exhaust or something else going on with the Ford cars that hopefully they can get reconciled going forward. But Kevin Harvick, Chase Elliott, they weren't the only drivers to experience some problems that had aspirations on much better finishes. We saw Kyle Larson fall a number of laps back, but to the Five's credit, was able to get it all together, rally, get on the lead lap. Not the finish he was looking for, but he avoided the disaster, which, as we said, is so important every single playoff race.
This is like, maybe you look back at this race and say, this is maybe where Larson really set himself up to potentially win the championship, because he was 3 or 4 laps down and gets back on the lead lap, which is not easy at a high tire wear track. I mean, it's one thing if you do it at Michigan, it's a completely different thing to do it at a place like Darlington. So I think that team has to be really happy with that 12th place finish. To do a postmortem on your bets for the weekend, I think it's really important to call out how wrong I was on Kyle Larson this week. I thought that he was 6-1. I thought there was value on him to win the race at 6-1. And there was never a point where I thought he was the fastest car. I mean, there was faster cars in every single run. And, it's just one of those things where we maybe have to look at Larson a little differently. I know we're going to dive into this in stage 3. But, man, not the car I thought he had. But I'll tell you what, kind of showed some resiliency, and that's what you need in order to win a championship. And this could be a little bit of a stepping stone, even though it wasn't the finish they were looking for. I still think that they can take away some positive things from this Darlington race.
Yeah, it's all the little things you do correctly, and I know we talked about it last week at Daytona. Ryan Blaney and his team getting that car back out there to finish 3 points ahead of Martin Truex to secure passage into the postseason. And like you said, we'll see after we go to Kansas, after we go to Bristol, how important it was for the Five to get a good finish, or a decent finish, I should say, from what could have been an absolutely disastrous day. And speaking of disaster, 2 members of JGR had what we would define as race-winning cars. One of them had a multi-second lead, his engine expires, and under the exact same caution, his teammate is dealt a similar hand. When you look at Martin Truex Jr. and Kyle Busch, they were the 2 best cars, maybe arguably most of the day. Neither one of them finished inside the top 30.
I mean, this was the shocking part of the race, in my opinion, to have something happen so quickly where the top 2 cars, and you'd probably say dominant cars. I mean, Truex had a 6-second lead, and then obviously Kyle Busch was clearly the second best car at that point in the race, which is, by the way, all that matters. You want to be good at the end of the race. And to see those engines expire, man, it's got to be tough. That's a big hole for Kyle to kind of jump out of, especially because he's just so impatient. But I kind of felt for Martin Truex Jr. when you see his interview after he gets out of the car. He was almost in tears, and we kind of forget the human element of this. Is Truex is someone that wants to win races, and he's had an opportunity to win multiple times this year. And to be honest, it hasn't been the driving that's held him back. So I imagine it's got to be a little bit of a bummer for him. But based on speed in that race car, I think you'll see him get to victory lane before the end of the year.
Well, and you mentioned Kyle Busch. I think the silver lining for the 18 camp, he has no doubt been the model of inconsistency all season. We continue to anticipate an announcement of where he'll be racing next year. I did find it interesting that Dale Jr. speculating that he would be a member of Cowlick Racing. We'll see if that comes to pass, as there's a lot of things that Dale Jr. is probably privy to that don't make it to mainstream NASCAR personalities as well. And when you look at the next 2 tracks, I mean, the silver lining should be there that the 18 has run well at 1.5 miles. We know how good the 18 has been at Bristol, but there is no guarantee by any stretch of the imagination. One other interesting storyline that emerged as we try and wave the white flag for 1 to go on stage 1, you look at Daniel Suarez. I'm not even sure what to make of his racing day. I know we'll get to his teammate in stage 3 and looking at Ross Chastain and the way he's being priced. But the 99 makes some controversial comments in the wake saying he wants to get revenge for Christopher Bell. I'm all over the place with the 99. I want to buy into him. I want to try and figure out what he's capable of doing, but he just leaves me more perplexed seemingly every single Sunday during the race season.
Well, yeah, he's picking a fight with Chris Bell. Like, Chris Bell is the least aggressive racer out there. And the fact he's like, I will get him back eventually. Like, what race are you watching? Like, we're not watching the same race, apparently, because I think intent actually matters. And by the way, if Chris Bell has something coming for the way that he drives, what would he say his teammates should have coming to him for the way that Chastain's been driving all year? So, I don't know. Danny, maybe just be quiet for a little bit. I don't know. I understand he was frustrated. And trust me, his backup was up against the wall, and maybe if he doesn't have that late penalty, there's no issue, and he probably escapes with a better finish than what he probably should have. But I just think you're picking a fight with Chris Bell, and that's just not the way he races. And I think Daniel looks ridiculous when he does stuff like this.
Hey, I mean, Suarez may have amigos in the stands, as we know all too well. He keeps up these comments. He's going to have a lot more enemigos on the racetrack going forward. So we'll see what the 99 is capable of doing, but we do like drivers that stir the pot a little bit. It makes things significantly spicier, and if you can create some of those rivalries, especially amongst young drivers, even if they don't rear their ugly head in this first phase of the postseason, we'll see it come home to roost long before the season comes to an end. I want to remind all of you, our loyal listeners, you can follow Chris on Twitter. That's at ChrisWormy15. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. And again, most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And as we typically do for stage 2, we make the transition away of what we learned from the race that was into some of the gambling concepts to make all of our listeners smarter. And I think the overarching question for me, Chris, and we kind of hinted at where we might be going, did the first race change the way you want to approach handicapping the playoffs if suddenly reliability is factoring into the equation, something that we've never really thought about in NASCAR with the elite racing teams, but I know a lot of F1 bettors have encountered with DNFs and engines expiring. Do you feel that this is more of an anomaly or it's something that bears watching going forward?
Well, I mean, hopefully it doesn't get to the point where you can bet on the first retirement of the race. I don't think that that's something that any of these manufacturers want to worry about. It's weird to have it happen this late in the season. I feel like we haven't had some of the reliability issues that kind of reared their ugly head last week. So it's just one of those things where you have to kind of do a double take before you make a bet. Like, hey, am I sure that this engine is going to be able to hold up? And, as someone that was very high on Gibbs all weekend and heavily invested in them, I kind of have to, I don't think that they're going to have these reliability issues, but it could be something that happens in the future. Now, it's kind of a double-edged sword because you can sit here and say, oh, no, I made the right bet, and then the engine expires. Well, I'll tell you what, if the engine continues to expire and you keep betting on that engine that blows up, well, at a certain point, that's on you. And I'm not going to rush to judgment and say that this is going to be what's happening week in and week out, but it is something that's definitely not in the back of my mind, but kind of in the middle of my mind to the front of it when handicapping this race. The other thing it's done is it's definitely handcuffed me when it comes to I guess guys that I would consider to have a little bit of value that are Toyotas early in the week. I'd rather just see them unload well before I make any bets.
Well, and we've seen Toyota priced extremely short. We'll, of course, get to the race odds for this upcoming weekend at Kansas, but I do want to ask you a follow-up to that. As far as Kyle Larson is concerned, we know whatever was going on in his car, he was able to sort out, got back on the lead lap, and was able to salvage his day. But this is the second time in as many weeks that his car hasn't driven exactly the way that he drew it up. And I was going to say once an anomaly, twice not quite a coincidence, but if the 5 were to have any mechanical issues, whether it's with his digital dash, communication system, or anything else, I'm going to have some legitimate concerns about the defending champion and his ability to punch his ticket to Phoenix and be one of the final 4 racing for the championship.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you don't know what you don't know. And we're discovering new ways to lose bets. And, I guess if you're on the other side of these bets, you're finding new ways to win them. And, man, I think reliability is so hard to handicap. It's almost like you have to treat it like an externality and just kind of move forward. But if it keeps happening and it keeps happening consistently with certain manufacturers more than others, well, maybe you have to pay attention a little bit. Like I said, I'm not, too nervous for Hendrick or for the Gibbs guys, but it is interesting that it's happened to those teams specifically, or even the Fords catching on fire. I mean, it sounds terrible when you say it. Like, well, the Fords, they keep catching on fire. Like, why would you bet on that? But it sounds a little worse than it is. I mean, I hope, because it would be terrible if it came down to reliability issues when it came to the championship.
For sure, and it's just something that you always want to keep in the back of your mind. We know there are so many ways you can win a bet, but there are also so many ways that are significantly different when you're betting NASCAR that you can go out there and lose a bet. So you always want to factor all of that into your process to arrive at the most informed decision. And when you're talking about informed decisions, one of the questions that came up to me, Worm, through social media more often than not, look, our listeners knew that we endorsed a bet on Christopher Bell at a price of 16-1. That number drifted out a little bit. For those folks that waited, they were probably able to grab 20. But what's your overall sentiment in terms of building a portfolio of drivers to go out there and be crowned champion? Is it something that you like to do? Is it something that you shy away from and you prefer to focus much more race to race than the big picture?
Well, I think it's something I look at on Mondays, kind of after the race, because depending on the race that we just had, like for example, Darlington, I think that showing speed at Darlington means you're going to show speed at probably 5 or 4 more tracks in the playoffs. So that was one of those things where, I mean, the Toyotas seem really fast, but on the same token, like Logano's leading the points, and Chase had led all year up until this race. So right now, I think it's the most important thing is you have speed in your race car. Like, that's the one thing you can control. Or I guess you can control as a gambler. But I still think it's very difficult to kind of pick the winner. I think you still need a little bit more form than just we still have 9 more weeks. So I did like Chris Bell. I mean, he's sitting in 4th place. He's 10 points back off the lead. But the biggest thing for him is I think he's shown more speed than Logano and Byron. He's probably showed a similar amount of speed as Denny Hamlin. And then you look at the guys around him. You got Tyler Reddick. He's hit or miss sometimes. Ryan Blaney has not been on his game lately. And then Larson obviously has had issues. Chastain certainly will have an uphill battle if people start to take issue with the fact that he's still in the playoffs. So right now, I do like Bell. I think he still kind of has the best value. But you don't know until the line's open. And, sometimes I might like a guy and then I see a price and the price isn't worth it. So it's not a bet, even though I do like him to either move on in the playoffs or win the playoffs as a whole.
Well, you mentioned Ross Chastain. The way he's racing right now, he may take himself out of playoff consideration unless he's able to regain some of the form that we haven't seen since he finished 2nd at Atlanta, which feels like an eternity ago. So we'll keep tabs on the one car. And you brought up a little bit, so I think it's important to hit on this before we slam the book shut on stage 2, trying to assess a postmortem. We talk about it all the time in football, which may be a little bit more cut and dry. You can dig into the box score. You can figure out if turnover luck worked in your favor, where the 3 key plays may have been in an NFL game or in college football. Hey, if my team ended up putting together long sustained drives but settled for field goals or turned it over in the red zone, I know why the variance wasn't in my favor. When you're looking at NASCAR and you go back to break down your card, whether it be a pre-race outright, whether it's the head-to-head matchup portfolio that you're building, or a lot of the live betting where I know you really pride yourself and focus a ton over the course of a 3.5, 4-hour race, what do you suggest for new bettors to try and provide a realistic assessment of some of the things they did right versus the things that they can improve when they do their own postmortem, realizing that it's a learning curve that can be a little bit steep and daunting for those folks new to betting motorsports?
There's 2 parts to this. There's the postmortem of, hey, was I right or was I wrong? I think you have to be as objective as possible. And I think if we look back and, I faded Suarez across the board when the news came out that he was going to go a lap down. And, those bets probably should have gone 2-2. They ended up going 3-1 based on, some unlucky, pit issue that Suarez had. But he also had to get lucky from a caution perspective. So I think that I probably had
which I told you probably was going to come in the first 3 laps because we know the gambling gods don't give away any freebies.
Yeah, as soon as it rained, the night before, and I knew there was going to be like 25 laps, by the way, is enough time for cars to go down a lap. So that's why I kept the bets and didn't get out of them. It was the rain that came right before that. Now, there's certain circumstances where maybe he might not have been pinned a lap or whatever, but he still had to go out and beat Byron and Bowman, okay? And those guys are really fast. And if there's any issues, kind of working your way up through the field, then Dillon and Briscoe beat him as well. However, Briscoe was caught up early. Anyway, I could go on about that forever. I don't think that was necessarily the wrong play.
You're not bitter. Bitter party of one. Bitter party of one.
Worm party of one. Bitterville. Yeah. So, but when it comes to like Chase Elliott over Austin Cindric, I mean, that was the right side. And then Harvick over Blaney, I still think that's the right side. Where I was wrong is I thought Harvick might be like a top 5 car, and there was never an instance when he was even running top 5 speed. So I think that, Harvick's kind of probably properly priced right now in the market at about 15-1. Can he go out and win races? Absolutely. But they were a very special set of circumstances for him to win those races, whether it's, having Denny Hamlin, with a late penalty, and then some of the other guys that, I guess at Richmond he was the fastest kind of at the end there. So I'll give him Richmond, but definitely at Michigan he had to have some luck go his way. But what I'm realizing is I'm still kind of new to this NASCAR Twitter thing, and there's a lot of self-promotion through retweeting compliments on picks. And
I think let me put one caveat to that because I want to hear your take on this, but I don't think it's just an endemic for NASCAR Twitter. I think it's across all gambling Twitter now, regardless of what sport you follow closest. And I know you're fully entrenched in the NASCAR world that people aren't exactly transparent. It's a lot about self-promotion. And I think it can be intimidating for new bettors who constantly see folks patting themselves on the back, basically appearing that they've never lost an outright in a race. But go ahead. I'll let you continue.
Yeah, here's the deal. By the way, every week someone's going to bet the winner. Okay. And when they do, you're going to hear about it. So at first, when it happened, I'm like, wow, they actually had that guy? Oh, that's really good. That was a good bet. I didn't have that. But that's where it comes down to the explanation. And this is why I've always been, I always thought that the explanations were so important. And congratulations to everybody that hate Erik Jones. If you bet Erik Jones, saying to yourself, he's really good at high wear tracks, and you know what, this is a long race, there could be a certain set of circumstances where he could find himself out front with 25 to go. And if he gets out front, he's definitely, he has a chance at winning the race. And by the way, I think for that to happen, that might happen 1 out of every 50 races. And because I'm getting 80-1, that's why I'm going to bet it. That would be a great explanation as to why someone bet on Erik Jones. A terrible explanation would be, I think he was a top 5 car at Fontana. He'll be a top 5 car this week. Erik Jones was not a top 5 car. He was probably a 9th to 12th place best car throughout this race. So if your explanation was you thought he was going to be fast and compete for the win straight up with every other driver, then you were wrong. But if you said that, hey, if there's a chance, that these things happen, then and he gets out front, he could win. But like I said, don't get discouraged by tweets that are promoting like, oh my gosh, if you're not following this person or following that person. Like, listen, the other part, I guess, to betting on anything would be understanding what makes you, what upsets you and what your risk tolerance is. I know that you and I are both low volume bettors, mainly because we hate losing. I hate losing one bet. There are so many people that just trust their numbers and they fire 15 or 20 matchups a race. I'm not that guy. I hate losing matchups, and so I don't like to play that many because it's way harder to win 10 than it is to win 2. So I kind of stay within my own understanding of how I know I react, and I still want to enjoy this. And if I'm going to enjoy this, I can't lose a lot of bets. And so I usually have 1 or 2 outrights and then a few that I add live, and maybe 3 or 4 matchups, but those are so price dependent. This week I think I had 12 total between Xfinity and Cup, which actually is a lot for me, but it turned out to be a profitable weekend. Didn't have Jones, but ultimately don't feel bad if you didn't have the 80-1er.
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of his betting style. And look, I'll give this NASCAR community a ton of credit. There's a lot of camaraderie between sharp guys out there. I love to see the information exchange and the challenging that goes on, not in a negative manner, but forcing people to try and back up some of their logic or explain their process. And I think it's probably better as a gambling community than what you see elsewhere. But there's no doubt that every bettor, regardless of the sport, has to identify his or her style, figure out what works, understand their bankroll constraints, and what's going to allow them to use this as a learning vehicle before they can turn it into a money-making choice. Because I know a lot of folks out there that are going to bet NASCAR, they're going to bet the NFL that starts in earnest this weekend, or a myriad of other sports. Hey, at the end of the day, you're paying for your cost of entertainment, and that's the most important part, that you're comfortable with the money you're risking should you have a race that goes completely sideways, and you'll be back the following week to put your money to work for you. So we'll call that the end of stage 2, but not before. We do one thing that we always do around these parts, and that's share where you can find the on-track activities this weekend from Kansas. And we have a triple header weekend that'll kick off Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock Eastern on FS2, Truck Series practice, and that'll roll right into Truck Series qualifying. Once that's complete, flip on over to USA Network at 5 o'clock Eastern, where you can watch Xfinity Series practice, and that, again, rolls right into Xfinity Series qualifying before the final on-track activity Friday night is the Truck Series race. 134 laps, 201 miles. You can see that on FS1 as the trucks get back on track. Saturday, the Cup boys will get things going at 12 o'clock Eastern, and you can see Cup Series practice on the NBC Sports app. You can also listen to it, as always, as part of the Motor Racing Network. At 12:50 Eastern, Cup Series qualifying should get underway as well, and that'll also be available on the NBC Sports app. So make sure you have all of those tools at your disposal. And then the last thing that we'll see on Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern, the Xfinity Series race, 200 laps, 300 miles on USA Network. And then, of course, we wrap things up on Sunday with the big boys getting back on track. A 400-mile race, 267 laps at 1.5 miles at Kansas, and that is on USA Network. But I am going to throw you a little bit of a curveball, Worm, because NASCAR did unveil, and I know we're running probably an episode behind, so there won't be any spoilers here. NASCAR Race to the Championship. We'll call it what it is. It's NASCAR's version of the very popular show that we've seen for F1 on Netflix called Drive to Survive. And I think it's an interesting way where they're peeling back the curtain, trying to humanize some of the NASCAR drivers. And the biggest takeaway for me on some of these guys is you see how family-oriented they are and how driving, whether it's go-karts, whether it's modifieds or anything else, really runs in the DNA that it's racer father, racer son, and I'm sure we're going to see some racer daughters over the next handful of years as well.
Yeah, and I think that the fans are kind of the same way. You know, a lot of the people that are, you know, that I know or that are in my life that are NASCAR fans, it's because their father was a NASCAR fan or their uncle or their brother or something like that. So NASCAR definitely has kind of that legacy fandom and also legacy driver. It was interesting. I thought that very well done, and, you know, kind of the content you haven't seen NASCAR provide its fans before. So peeling back the curtain, I thought it was great. Obviously, they focused on Larson, Logano, and Suarez the first episode. You know, it's definitely entertaining, and it's great because, you know, my girlfriend doesn't know anything about NASCAR, and so this is like her way to learn, you know, who the drivers are. And when I say Larson, she knows who I'm talking about. You know, is that really nice guy? You know, so yeah, I think that there's an element of, you know, kind of, you know, family, but also I think that anyone in the family would enjoy not only watching the races, but also kind of this Race to the Championship TV show.
Yeah, I think it's a good entry-level vehicle, and I know USA is playing it on loop. You can obviously set your DVR. I think first-run episodes air Thursday night at 9 or 10 Eastern, and we're going to be a week behind on this, so we'll try and talk about it. We're not going to spend an inordinate amount because it's not going to make you better bettors, but I think it's an important vehicle to create awareness for NASCAR, allow some of those personalities to share who they are as individuals, both on the track and away from the track. And all I can say, words of advice to you, Chris, when you do ultimately settle down, that you change your girlfriend's name in your phone to what Joey Logano has in there for his wife, and will allow the viewers to check that out when they showed the full screen display when Joey was trying to balance between should he be racing in the Clash or should he make himself available when his wife Brittany was about to give birth to their third child.
Yeah, that was definitely, you know, that's the human element of sports that a lot of people don't understand, and, you know, these people are living their lives as well, and it was interesting to see you know, kind of the back and forth on, you know, the thought process for the Logano family. If here's the deal, if it's like any race, but the Clash at the Coliseum, something that it's never happened before, or like outside the Daytona 500, I think Logano easily makes that decision and I just won't even go, right? If there's a chance. But to have it be this first time Clash, and by the way, it worked out really well for him.
Yes, that it did for the 22. Spoiler alert, he won the Clash and grabbed the checkered flag.
Just in case you're DVRing the whole season, sorry that you're going to have to, find that out the hard way. But I don't know. I thought it was great. I'm interested to see kind of where things go from here. And also as someone that watches every practice, every qualifying, you feel like really a part of their lives. And so to kind of see their thoughts and kind of mirror them back to some of the thoughts that you've had, it is kind of interesting. And obviously I'm certainly going to be paying attention as anyone that probably listens to this podcast will be as well. So I'm excited to see where they go next.
Yeah, a good, interesting tool to try and expose and make some of these NASCAR drivers household names for those folks that don't have a high level of familiarity with them. We get so accustomed to seeing them put on their racing helmets, and we call them out by their racing numbers. But to your point, there is a very human element, and there is a real risk involved every time these guys put themselves in the driver's seat and go racing at 200 miles an hour. Stage 2 officially in the books. It's time to move on to Stage 3, and as we always do in Stage 3, it's all about previewing the upcoming race and trying to make all of you smarter bettors. We'll head to Kansas this weekend, and so as far as track specs are concerned, Kansas Speedway is a 1.5 mile, 2.4 kilometers for our Canadian friends and those folks that use the metric system.
Wow.
D-shaped oval racetrack in Kansas City, Kansas. Built back in 2001, and it currently hosts 2 annual NASCAR race weekends. It's also home to the Penn National Gaming Hollywood Hotel and Casino. They've really done everything they can to turn it into an entertainment complex of sorts, with NASCAR being the focal point this weekend. What's interesting about this, and I'll get your take on track comps, tire codes, well, that'll actually change for this race. We're going to see the same right side tire that we saw at Pocono, but different left side tire. So it's interesting to see what we'll get in practice. We can only hope that it alleviates some of the unusual flat tires that we had the first time we came to Kansas. The Toyotas, well, they ran real well at Pocono. Speculation that they wanted to avoid the random flat tires we experienced. But as far as track comps, this is where your expertise is so big to at least give people a baseline for how they should be handicapping. What tracks do you find most familiar, or data points that you factor into the equation other than the obvious, the first race we had at Kansas?
Oh, man. I was going to use that, the first Kansas race. Well, here's where, you get thrown a curveball. I fully anticipate.
Well, spoiler alert again, then don't bet Kurt Busch to win this race at Kansas like he did the first time around.
Oh, man. You think they'll refund me my bet? Because I already bet him.
If any book actually had a number on Kurt, then it's a shame to let a sucker keep his or her money.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, this is where, when I was reading the Goodyear tire notes this morning, I kind of anticipated that they were going to see the same right side tire that we had at Darlington, which was, the same we had at Kansas, and then Charlotte, Vegas. So when it wasn't that same tire, I was like, uh-oh. I kind of didn't know what to think. And it's not like I want to go to Pocono, because I feel like that's drives so differently than Kansas does. So to be honest, I've been thinking about this a lot today, and I'm just looking at kind of the first Kansas race. I might take into account just Kansas history, but I think at this point in the season, we know who's got speed and who doesn't on these types of tracks. And I don't want to get too caught up with justifying a bet one way or the other based on history. If you want to bet based on history, you could bet Kevin Harvick at every track, right? He's been around for so long. He's won almost everywhere. You could say the same for Kyle Busch. And so at a certain point, I feel like history becomes irrelevant, because it's kind of a fool's errand to say that Harvick is good at one track or not good at another. Truex for a long time never won at a short track, and then he was dominant at short tracks. So I think that I'm taking a little bit of the history out of this track, and I'm going to try and concentrate on just current form and just, I guess, manufacture speed at tracks like this. And, I think that Vegas is probably the biggest comp you could make, maybe Michigan for just straight line speed and aero. But, Vegas was so long ago, and Michigan is a different track. So I think Kansas really stands on its own. I mean, there was a lot of comparisons to Chicago in the past, and that's just not the case. Chicago had a way more tire wear. And so right now, it's just I want to look at current form and not get too caught up in some of the data points that a lot of people are going to be throwing around because, the data you can skew in your way one way or the other. You can justify a bet almost any time and anywhere at any number. So I'm going to just try and look at it for what it is. It's the second Kansas race, and it's the second race of the Chase, and who's running fast on this type of track.
The second race of what?
The playoffs.
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 We're gonna get that corrected by the time that we get to Phoenix, one way or another. If it means hooking up an electric buzzer to your neck, like a shot collar that I can control remotely from 2,000 miles away,
hilarious.
We're gonna make the NASCAR folks extremely happy. But all right, into the drivers themselves, and rather than looking at the favorites, the value, and the long shots out there, I think this exercise might be best done if we were to look at some of the individual race teams. And HMS probably provides a logical starting point when you look at Kyle Larson, widely available in that 7-1 range, Chase Elliott in the 8-1 range. You kind of tipped your hand a little bit earlier about the 5 in terms of how we might need to adjust our particular handicap for what we see in practice versus the way the 5 will race. When you look at how he's performed at Kansas, 5 top 8 finishes, 4 of them in the top 4 in his last 7 Kansas starts. Did win here last October en route to the championship. And the craziest stat of all, he's led 291 of the 801 laps he's raced here over his last 3 trips. When you're looking at the 5, what are some of your expectations this weekend?
Well, my expectations are he's going to qualify well. He's going to dominate practice. I'm going to bet him at a short price, and he's going to be a top 6 car maybe. I don't know. That's unfortunately, I'm becoming jaded over this 5 car. Last year like I said, double-edged sword. Yeah, you were able to bet Larson, 10 times and win. You were probably getting a short price, but you were at least cashing a ticket. So this is tough because Larson looks good in practice week in and week out, and we're just not seeing the same results. And I'm going to be hesitant to back him until I don't know. He's tough. That was a tough question, Todd. Can I move on to Chase Elliott? Here's the deal with Chase Elliott.
We can move on to.
I don't know what to say about Larson.
Or if you'd like, you could phone a friend. I mean, I'm not sure who you want to talk to really help in this situation. But yes, we can move on to Chase Elliott.
Okay, so Chase Elliott, he's not going to race any differently. The only way, just because of the situation that he was put in last week, the only way I see him racing differently is, there were a few times in that race, the first Kansas race, where guys were taken 4 wide. You might see him be the first to lift, right? Whereas normally he's going to stick it in there and not lift. I think that's probably the only time. He's not going to put himself in a bad position, but he rarely does that anyway. So I think that you'll just see him kind of run consistently. I imagine he'll finish between 5th and 10th place. He'll be average in practice. He'll say a lot of nothing about his car after practice, and they'll just kind of mind their P's and Q's and get a good finish. And then that way they're kind of stress-free going into Bristol, where he is, he has a definite, chance to win. And then when it comes to Byron, here's the deal with Byron. We're going to know in the first 5 laps of practice whether Byron's going to be competitive or not. He either unloads like a rocket and is a part of this race all day long, or he's going to struggle. And when he struggles, he likes to struggle back there in 15th place all day. But I'll tell you what, definitely speed. I think the most speed kind of in that 24 car. I think that Larson gets more speed out of his car, but on a week in and week out basis, we're seeing the most speed out of the 24 team and the most consistency out of the 9 team.
And I keep waiting for the 24 to catch his stride. I mean, we saw how good he was early in the year, went through a middle-of-the-season swoon where the best finish he was able to put together was 9th place. Now, granted, he was able to break into the top 10 at Darlington, and maybe that's a sign that he's able to turn the corner. So we'll keep tabs on the 24 and figure out if he's got a race-winning machine under him after practice on Saturday. From HMS camp, a little time for Toyota talk. And when you look at the Toyotas, hey, look, pretty short prices on a trio of drivers. Denny Hamlin at 6, Kyle Busch at 6, Martin Truex at 8, Christopher Bell, the long shot amongst his teammates. And I use that term long shot relatively speaking at 12-1. When you begin to assess the table as far as speed is concerned for these 4 drivers, how do you go about trying to set the pecking order? And in your opinion, did odds makers get it right?
Yeah, that's speed-wise, I mean, I think the Toyotas are the fastest week in and week out. Where I would rate them on speed, I would say probably Kyle Busch has probably had the most speed when he's running. He's kind of like Byron in that sense, where he when he unloads well, he's super fast all weekend. When he doesn't, he struggles. Whereas Denny Hamlin, it doesn't matter kind of how he unloads. He's got speed in his car. I guess that's how I'd quantify the difference between Denny and Kyle. When it comes to Truex, he's just doing Truex things. If he doesn't practice quite as well, he might be looking for something different from a speed perspective in practice that Denny and Kyle are looking for. He's just super consistent and, kind of a rhythm driver where all of a sudden he hops on the radio and says like, oh man, my car feels good. I might be able to win, and it's like that never happens to Kyle and Denny. They just expect to be up there and to win. So that would be the difference with Truex. And then Chris Bell is always just the wild card. He's the youngest guy that figures things out the best, in my opinion. I think that, week in and week out, he's the most reliable Gibbs car. He might not have the top end speed or the speed out front that the 18 and the 11 have had, but man, look at his finishes relative to everyone else in the whole series. And over the last 5 or 6 races, there's no one that's been more consistent or better than him. I mean, his worst finish in the last 6 races is 12th. That's pretty good, for a young guy, that's figured it out this year. So, I don't know. Oh wait, no, I'm looking at the wrong guy. That was the 22. The 20 is. let me try that again.
It does help when you look at the right driver. When
let
you
me try that again.
Down. So okay, we'll hit pause and we'll give you a do-over here. Although we're not editing anything out, so people know that what they get is an unquestioned look and an unbiased approach for how we go about this. So, all right, we'll hit the reset button for you. Now tell us about the 20 instead of the 22, Chris.
Wow. That makes me all of a sudden really like the 22. I thought I was looking at the 20's finishes, and it was Logano's, and I was about to just dunk on Logano, and I'm like, oh my gosh. All right, so here's the deal with Chris Bell. He's won a race in the last 10, obviously at New Hampshire, but he had a great finish at Pocono. Indy, which I think you can just kind of as a toss-out race. He had 12, obviously issues at Michigan with 26, but then he comes back at Richmond with a second place where he easily could have won with another half lap. Watkins Glen, an 8th place finish. Daytona, obviously a throwaway, but a great finish here in Darlington, and he was never really outside the top 10. So,
thankfully for our best bet that we gave out on this very show at the same time last week. Good call out of you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that. So now let's get on to Joey Logano. Oh my gosh,
right,
how good is this guy?
And as far as Christopher Bell is concerned, his 15 top 10 finishes this year are the most of all JGR drivers. Has him tied for second in the series with Ross Chastain, behind only Chase Elliott. So it just puts into perspective how well Christopher Bell has done, and typically flies under the radar because of some of the bigger drivers on his own race team that overshadow him. And as far as Joey Logano, all right, do you want to get to the 4 drivers? Do you want to talk Logano? You want to talk Blaney?
Well, let's talk. I do want to talk Logano.
I'm just gonna open it up to you. Why don't you tell me which driver you'd like to talk about, so you can make sure your notes are in a presentable manner and you don't handicap the wrong guy and heap praise on the improper driver.
Let's talk about Joey Logano.
All right, Joey Logano it is.
Logano's tough because he's like a guy that, at least for myself, I kind of love to hate. When we're watching the show with my girlfriend, she's like, oh, that Logano seems nice. I'm like, yeah, wait till you watch him race. That'll change your mind. Wait till you have Byron at Darlington in the first race, and he just, instead of trying to pass him, he just, punts him. So, but his finishes, man, he's been super, super consistent. And I think that right now Logano's kind of figured out that he doesn't, that his team doesn't maybe have that top 3 or 4 speed. But if he can just keep those mistakes to a minimum, he's kind of pulling a Chase Elliott here by finishing, those last 6 races, 6th, 4th, 6th, 3rd, 12th, and then 4th. And at Richmond, he easily could have won that race without that cloud cover. So I think that the guy that's leading the points right now, Joey Logano, has a legit chance at being competitive for this championship. Not to mention he runs really well at Martinsville, which is his second to last race, and then he runs well at Phoenix. So I think that Logano, this is a tough track for him historically. So I'm not rushing to get anything down on him from a a race perspective, but 20-1 is a pretty healthy price. If he unloads well, I will not be afraid to fire there. Here's the deal at Darlington. I'm gonna say this. He was not that good at Darlington. I would say in either race, he was okay. That first pit stall is a gold mine. And you know what? He used that to his advantage. He didn't try to get more out of his car. He didn't push the issue. He just hung around. And that's what you need to win championships for sure.
Yeah, someone sitting on a Christopher Bell outright ticket, I would have loved if 9/10 of a second or whatever it was, 9/100ths of a second that kept him off the pole, may have been able to catapult the 20 into the catbird seed and allowed him to grab the checkered flag. But you mentioned Joey Logano, and there's a reason he's 20-1 at Kansas this weekend. Finished 17th here last time around, and in the last 7 trips that he's made to Kansas in the Cup Series, 1 win, just 2 top 10 finishes. He's finished 15th or worse in 5 of 7. So we'll see where rubber meets the road and how the 22 unloads. When you look at some of the other drivers, I think the 3 that stood out to me, probably Kevin Harvick. You talked about him a little bit. Tyler Reddick priced at 12-1. Harvick, by the way, widely available, 16-1. And then Ross Chastain, who's just kind of flying around. We've seen his odds drift out. The days of seeing Ross at 8-1, probably in the rear view until he's able to get things going. And I feel for me personally, the 1 car has been one of the most difficult guys to handicap because he now has 7 straight races with no finish better than 18th, but he's being priced like an elite driver because he has shown speed in practice.
Yeah, let's just start with Chastain. I think other teams have caught up a bit. I think that Trackhouse had a little bit more speed early on in the season, and other teams were playing catch up. And now he's struggling a little bit. Here's the thing: Chastain always starts off the race really well. I don't know if you've noticed that every time that the race starts, he's always picking up spots. He's usually the biggest mover because he hasn't qualified super well, in the past couple months. So he's always working his way through the field, but then they have issues, and they're struggling dealing with those issues, whether it's a speeding penalty or, just a long stop on pit road. They haven't been able to kind of alleviate some of those mistakes and get the finishes that they need. But certainly early on in the race, there's speed in the race car because he's making passes. When it comes to a guy like Kevin Harvick, I think that the market's caught up with him a little bit. Everyone last week was super high on Harvick. I felt almost like a public flake saying I kind of like Harvick too because everyone loved him, and he was not as good as I anticipated. And a lot of that, the reason we thought he was good was only because of his track history. But if we look at his track history at almost every track, he's got wins at a lot of places. So I think we have to kind of take the 4 for what it is. And right now, it's a decent car that's had great finishes relative to the speed. And if some of these other teams clean up some of their mistakes, I think you see Harvick kind of be an 8th to 12th place car at best. Especially this week. I know that he is good here, but I don't know. I'm going to need to see a little bit more out of Harvick before I'm going to start investing in him. At least even after practice, I want to see a little bit more out of practice.
Yeah, you mentioned the 4. 8 top 2 finishes at Kansas going back to 2013. It does include a second-place result in 2 of his last 4 starts here. Only finished 15th in May, which may be more indicative of the Force card lack of speed that we just haven't seen week in, week out. So definitely something to keep in mind as we talk about the efficiency in betting markets and how odds makers will catch up to the hot hand. And sometimes the driver that you've been riding, pun intended, suddenly becomes a fade candidate if he's overvalued accordingly. Any other drivers that you'd like to hit on, my friend, that you think our listenership should be aware of before we see these cars unload on Saturday?
Do you want me to list off Joey Logano's stats again for another driver? Maybe we could do that.
No, I do not. I do not want you to attribute the 22's track history at Kansas to other drivers or what his current form has looked like. I prefer if you were going to pick one other driver, you give accurate, usable information.
So here's my accurate, usable information on Joey Logano. The last time he won at Kansas, he wrecked Matt Kenseth to do it, and how'd that work out for him at Martinsville? That's all I'll say.
All right, that's a fair assessment. I can appreciate that, and it's how we can wave the checkered flag and close the book on Stage 3. Again, want to remind all of you guys to follow Chris on Twitter. That's at Chris Werme, CHRISWERME15. And if you haven't already done so, Chris also does a pre-race poll on Sundays. So if you're following him there, you can get some nuggets and tidbits as we have a better idea of exactly how the field will be set, what the grid will look like, and any potential penalties going into the race. You can follow me on Twitter at Todd Furman. And again, most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. Before I let you go, because you're barely going to get a C for a passing grade for the performance you put forth here, this is the chance where you have the opportunity to completely redeem yourself as far as pre-week investments, Worm. Where are you leading our listeners?
Well, I was going to say Bell top 10, but since I was no, I'm kidding. Bell's top 10 prices. By the way, the days of us just printing money betting Bell top 10 are over. It was a good run. So thank you everyone that participated, but we're looking at a minus.
That ship has
sailed. That ship has sailed. So we're on to someone new, and we're going to keep it going with a top 10 bet. I like William Byron to finish in the top 10. He's minus 110. Pretty much across all sites that are offering top 10s. I think William Byron top 10 is the best bet for this week headed into the weekend.
There we go. Back in the 24. I like the sounds of that. And again, a friendly reminder to all of you guys, we will also share something on Sunday once there's a little bit more liquidity in the market and all shops have hung head-to-head matchups. We understand that all pricing isn't available. We try and do our best. We look for on-screen matchups, which are available at some of the bigger shops that are out there. But hey, look, the reality of it is the NASCAR market a little bit more difficult to navigate through on race day than what you've grown accustomed to in stick and ball sports. So we're doing the best we can. We appreciate all the feedback. But most importantly, guys, these numbers, when we share them, they move quickly as we've seen some of the pricing, and we hope you guys can get to the best of the number. Any final words of wisdom, parting shots? Will you find yourself watching any of the NFL Week 1, or will it be all racing all the time in the Wormy household Sunday afternoon at 3 Eastern?
On Sunday, there will be no football. That's just, I can't, how do people bet multiple sports? I can't do that. Like, I see some NASCAR guys giving.
You have no life like me?
Oh, my gosh. Oh, go outside, read a book or something. No, there will be no, I'll watch football tomorrow night. That'll be my football fix until NASCAR's over. But by the way, so for those of you that don't know, I'm actually in the Super Contest, and so is Todd. And I was like, hey, can you give me something for week 1? And he said no, because I'm in the Super Contest as well. So I appreciate all the help there.
I may pass a little bit along to help you get your feet wet there, but I will never disclose the entry name, so you won't be able to find me. And if you do, don't disclose that. I like to operate in the shadows from a little bit of anonymity unless we happen to hit it big and win the ultimate prize. But all right, my friend, enjoy the race on Sunday. Appreciate all the input. As always, I'm glad you were able to figure out which drivers you were actually talking about before we hit the hour mark on this show. Want to wish all of you guys, our loyal listeners, the best of luck with all of your investments across the sporting landscape. But most importantly, with a William Byron top 10 ticket in hand come Sunday afternoon, hopefully we'll see you at the window.
Cheers.